Hey guys, Shouldoge here. Today we are looking at AbyssGaming's Crimson Remains. AbyssGaming first started releasing mouse pads with the collaboration of their lead designer, Rave in September of 2024 with the release of the Daimon. The Crimson Remains is supposed to be AbyssGaming's fastest cloth mouse pad, featuring their interpretation of a mid-bass, which even has a custom printing on the back of their logo. I bought mine at first from AliExpress, which came rolled up without a box, but I actually bought a second copy from Kibu for this reason, which ships to the US and came shipped flat with all the extra accessories. Now, moving on to the surface, looking at a macro shot, the surface weave reminds me a lot of an unworn Raiden. The surface weave itself is very tight and decently consistent, though there are some minor errors, with some threads being looser than others, but overall it is fairly consistent. The overall feel of the Crimson Remains gives a very smooth experience with a light texture when gliding across the surface. The feel on the hand is smooth across the y-axis as well, though I do feel my movements across the y-axis have to be made with more intention, which helps with keeping my cross point on the head, or whatever you're trying to aim at. While I would say this pad does feel similar to an unworn Raiden, I do not have one on me at the moment, let alone in the mid-bass, but even if I did, I feel like this pad would be slightly faster than it. But another pad I have, which I can use as a reference, would be the Tenta X Jinsoku. A fair comparison since the Jinsoku is also one of the faster budget pads you can get on the market. I would say overall the Jinsoku is a bit faster than the Crimson Remains, with the trade-off being that the Crimson Remains has a much smoother feel to it, while still having enough texture for feedback against the palm of your hand and your fingers. The Crimson Remain does also have a thinner and much more firm base, making it more akin to a glass pad than the Jinsoku is. The static and dynamic friction of this surface are fairly balanced with one another on this pad, and I can't confidently say that one is stronger or weaker than the other. If I were to go out on a limb, I would say that the static friction does feel a tiny bit weaker than the dynamic friction, but both frictional values of this pad feel very fast. Despite the lack of plushness with this pad, I don't find myself struggling to come to a stop, which is in part thanks to the micro-textured feel of the surface, which pairs nicely with its overall smooth feel. There is certainly a difference in the X and Y axis, and while you can still fairly easily move vertically across the Y axis, you will notice moderately more drag when moving across that axis more so than the X axis. But overall, nothing too bad, as this surface doesn't drag too harshly in general. The surface is very sweat and humidity resistant, which I believe can partially be in credit to its anti-fingerprint coating, which I will go into more depth on later in the quality section. I would call this surface sleeve friendly, as it works at least moderately well with all of my sleeve, and excels especially with my GamerSupps sleeve and my Pulsar ES sleeve. And wearing a sleeve does make for a better experience for this pad, so I definitely recommend using one. With the anti-fingerprint coating of this pad, it is very easy to keep clean, and I really don't get bothered by any debris on the surface or stuck between the threads. And bigger surface debris can easily be brushed off. And here's an audio clip with Magic Ice dot skates to show what that texture can sound and potentially feel like. Moving on to the base consists of polyurethane, which has the custom print of the AbyssGaming logo on the back, and is specified as having a mid-base, though I would say it's teetering on the edge of being firm, especially with how thin it is. The base doesn't have a sticky quality, as it wasn't too hard pulling it out of the wrapper, unlike other certain PU bases that stick to any and everything. The entire pad measures at 3.3mm thick, measuring with digital calipers, and moving on to the base properties, as I stated, it is teetering on the edge of being a firm base, though comparing it to LGG's firm base, which I believe to be a true firm base, this base does noticeably have more give to it than the LGG firm base, which is why I'd much rather say that this is a mid to firm base, much rather than a straight firm base. The base does adhere to the desk moderately well, which surprised me because of how firm and thin it is, much more so than LGG's firm and even Artisan's mid bases. The rebound is fairly quick for a mid base, which also surprised me, but what didn't surprise me is how dot skate friendly it is, considering how firm this base is. You can use any kind of skate on this pad without any issues. Moving on to stitching, the stitching pattern is very nice, reminiscent of Infinity Mice's stitching style to me. Especially with the solid black stitching, the edge stitching does not mesh with the rest of the pad and is visually separated from the rest of it. Due to the fact that this is a mid base, I didn't expect the edge stitching to have any plushness to it, and I was not wrong, as the edge stitching is a tad more firm than the rest of the surface, though it does get close to settling with the rest of the base when pressing down on the pad. Eyeballing it, I would certainly say the edge stitching is a bit higher than the rest of the surface, but not as extreme as other thin pads like LGG's firm bases, though you do notice it while you're gliding your arm over it. Moving on to quality, the surface does indeed have a coating, which AbyssGaming described to me as a anti-fingerprint coating when I asked about it, but I don't feel any big changes between my used copy and my new copy, which I have right here. Something that is worth noting though is between these two batches there is an inconsistency with the surface weave where they go in opposite directions, and while it doesn't change the speed at all, I do feel the microtexture feel on the new copy is more noticeable than the older copy. This is likely a difference in batch production if I were to guess. Even on my used copy, the speed has not changed in any spots, which tells me that this coating is either very good or doesn't correlate to the speed of this pad. I would more so suspect the latter, because if I were to go on a hunch, I would say the used spots of my old copy do feel a bit more texture than the unused spots. The printing quality is very nice on this surface, and while there aren't any sharp corners that would create a challenge during printing, the edges are clean and I don't notice any major bleeding between colors. The heat treatment process also seems to be very good, as I don't feel that stickiness that I would normally feel from poorly heat-treated surfaces. I will mention at this point that I love this art design as well. Rave really cooked with this one. There is no logo on the surface of the pad, so there will be no impact on performance as far as that goes, but they did put their logo on the underside of the base, which is very smart because it won't impact performance. The surface weave alignment with this pad is very clean and probably one of the nicer implementations I've seen in any of the pads I've used. Moving on to the base. On my newer copy that was shipped flat, there are no spots where the surface feels bumpy at all, and it provides a very smooth experience, which would be tragic if otherwise, considering it's a mid to firm base. However, there are some curling on the left edges on my newer copy, which is likely a result of the edges having been stitched a bit too tight, but this could easily be fixed, and I haven't had any impact on performance as it's fairly minor. The 490 by 420 millimeter dimensions provided in the description stands true, and it is very even all the way around, as I don't see any places where the edges stick out more than others. The base is consistently the same firmness all the way around the pad, and I don't feel any air pockets or other discrepancies between the surface and the base. The stitching on the Crimson Remains is very clean, as the distance between stitch to stitch stays very consistent even when looking from the underside. The implementation for where the stitching meets is very clean and doesn't have too much fraying. Not to say it's perfect, but it is also near the top left where you won't encounter it, so I haven't really had too many issues with it, and it's hard to even notice with the black edge stitching. There is no fraying around the edges of the pad, even where I've been resting and moving my arm on top of, which is very nice and makes for a very clean look around the edges. While Kibu has a great standing with customer service, AbyssGaming is a bit more quiet. When I asked about the coating of this pad, it was mostly one-word responses, and while they did answer quickly, I was kind of hoping for more, I suppose. Though this might be because I was asking with a translator and they didn't want their messages to be misinterpreted. It is worth noting though that refunds, cancellations, or returns are not possible with the current pre-orders rolling out of this pad. The community behind AbyssGaming is not dead per se, but there are a lot of fans that don't have anywhere to go to talk to one another. I'd love to see AbyssGaming make a Discord or something similar so that customers and or fans can discuss their products with each other, but for now the only place I could find them was on X or Twitter. The purchasing experience with Kibu was one of the best I've experienced. Not only was the payment process easy, but they were able to ship this pad to me packaged flat all the way from Japan to the US in just 9 days. I was very pleasantly surprised by this, to the point where I'd easily recommend buying this pad on Kibu, even if you can get it for cheaper on AliExpress. Moving on to the price, the pad came to around $55 including shipping for me, with shipping taking up $20 of that amount, so I imagine it would be much cheaper if you resided in Japan or other surrounding countries. It is packaged in a very nice custom flat box that is sealed with Velcro on the back, very premium for the price that you buy this pad at. It does come with a cool hologram card, but no skates or any other accessories. Even at the $55 price tag, including shipping that I bought this pad at, I would say it's at least worth the price, and I imagine you can get this for much cheaper if you reside in or near Japan, so it definitely has steel potential. In conclusion, I would recommend this pad to someone who is looking for a very fast pad with a firmer base and slightly distinct surface texture while remaining skin friendly. Especially if someone is looking to transition from glass to cloth, this would be one of my top recommendations in my collection. I would rate this pad a 90 out of 100, and I will certainly be buying from AbyssGaming again, as they have easily become one of my favorite brands in the industry. With all that being said, thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.